So who's going to be watching the Big 12? Good to see you right here at the Voice of College Football. We break down the game we all love each and every day with you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis based on your participation. And we broke it down last offseason. TV ratings. We will do the same right now, kicking off with the Big 12. But keep in mind, our task is much more complicated with schools moving conferences as we project forward to 2024. So kicking off with the Big 12, this is what we're going to do. Of course, we're going to look at all the TV numbers for Big 12 games. Let's take into consideration Oklahoma and Texas. We're going to post them as well. However, we're going to have to take those numbers away, of course, with those two schools moving to the SEC. Then we've got the four schools coming in from the Pac-12. So we're going to look at those numbers as well to see what kind of impact Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and Arizona State may make in moving to the Big 12. And of course, for Colorado, it could be a huge one. But on the downside for the Big 12, Oklahoma and Texas by far the two biggest brands, and the TV ratings for 2023 certainly back that up. So here we go, starting with week one. Colorado TCU was an enormous Fox Big Noon kickoff that garnered over 7 million views. Unfortunately for the Big 12, it was by far the most watched Big 12 game last season. Fortunately for the Big 12, both of these schools will be in the conference this season. West Virginia, Penn State. Got to think that Penn State provided more than half of these numbers, but still West Virginia, a decent draw, the fifth highest rated game of week one. Florida, Utah. On a Thursday night, broke the 3 million mark. Texas Tech, Wyoming, a thrilling overtime game that the Red Raiders lost on the road, was the only other Big 12 game that broke the 1 million mark, as the Big 12 accounted for 4 of the top 16, although one of those games, of course, involved a Pac-12 team in 2023, Utah. There were 29 games that garnished TV ratings in week two, including this gem, Nebraska, Colorado, and of course, we had all the hype surrounding Deion Sanders at the time, and Colorado brought in the viewers. Nebraska always brings in some eyeballs, but of course, this was all about the Buffs, and Deion at 8.73 million. Iowa State, a nice number, 3.38 million, is the fourth most watched game of the week. Oregon, Texas Tech was a thrilling game down to the wire, and the Ducks brought most of that audience at 2.55 million. Illinois, Kansas, they played on a Friday night and drew 1.36 million. Utah, Baylor, of course, both teams in the Big 12 now. Utah in the Pac-12 at the time was the only other game involving Big 12 teams that broke the 1 million mark, as the Big 12 accounted for 5 of the top 13. But again, we are including the games from the Pac-12 as well. As you see, Oklahoma State, Arizona State at 691,000. Cincinnati, Pitt, they would both post awful seasons last year at 617,000 viewers. Look at that number from Houston and Rice. Nobody watched that game. 83,000 folks. As we move it on to week three, we see the trend continue. Deion, the hype, the Colorado train was rolling. 9.3 million viewed for a game against Colorado State. That was an exciting game, but still, it's Colorado State. It's on ESPN, and it's a late night game at 10:30 Eastern, and it's still pushed 10 million viewers. We had 31 games in week three that brought TV ratings, including West Virginia and Pitt. That was the ninth highest rated game of the week at 2.41 million. TCU in Houston, BYU, Arkansas also broke the 1 million mark. As we check in on week four, 32 games played, and let's keep in mind that we're going to see a lot of Texas, Oklahoma near the top, and we're going to have to remove those ratings at some point here. Again, it's Colorado showing up against Oregon. That game brought in more than 10 million views. USC and Arizona State, of course, Arizona State now in the Big 12 at 2.63. Texas, Baylor is right there. Oklahoma, Cincinnati. But, of course, most of those views have to be attributed to Texas and to Oklahoma. There you see UCLA and Utah, so the Utes bring in over 1.3 million there. Kansas, BYU, a full Big 12 game with both teams participating from the Big 12 getting more than 1 million views. On the downside, you got TCU and SMU only got 269,000 views. Week 5, there we go. At the top of the heap of 28 rated games, Colorado and USC, 7.2 million. Kansas and Texas, there we go. The 7th rated game of the week, but Texas, of course, brought most of those views at over 3 million. Utah and Oregon State, that was a Friday night game at 1.28 million. Cincinnati and BYU also broke the 1 million mark. Oklahoma and Iowa State usually do better than 808,000 as the 15th rated game out of 28 that week. On to week 6 and 26 games rated. And the number 1 rated game in college football was Oklahoma and Texas. So take out the biggest draw of all in the Big 12. They are both going to the SEC. So out of the schools remaining, you've got Arizona and USC brought in 2.55 million. That was the 8th highest rated game of the week. And the Big 12 also had a top 10 game on a Friday night with Kansas State taking on Oklahoma State at 2.27 million. And we will see when we put it all together that for the Big 12 to post games with over 2 million viewers is really rare. We also had 2 games under 500,000 with Texas Tech taking on Baylor and TCU and Iowa State. In week 7, Colorado, despite starting to lose some games, and they really blew this one on a Friday night against Stanford, still bring in views, 3.29 million for the Buffs. Then after that, the Big 12 struggled in this particular week. TCU and BYU with barely 1 million viewers. All those other Big 12 games, even involving some really good teams, Kansas and Oklahoma State, Kansas State and Texas Tech played. They drew well short of 1 million viewers in week 7. Then in week 8, out of 33 games that rated, Utah and USC was number 1 at 3.2 million. Then keep in mind that 2 of the top 3 games in the Big 12 and 2 of the top 8 in the country involved 2 teams that are going to the SEC in Texas and Oklahoma. Past that, Arizona State barely got past 1 million, and that had to be attributed to Washington's undefeated run at that point. Oklahoma State and West Virginia barely got 1 million views. Texas Tech, BYU, and TCU, Kansas State, 2 of the bottom 10 or 12 games rated in week 8, and that also involves a lot of group of 5 games. In week 9, once again, it's Colorado. So if the shine is off Deion Sanders and the Buffs this year, that could really prove costly for the Big 12 because they're not going to draw these kind of numbers, you wouldn't think. Buffs and UCLA at 4.6 million. Then you see where Oklahoma and Texas once again are contributing 2 of the top 8 games in the country. In terms of TV viewership, Oklahoma-Kansas was an excellent game at 3.6 million. Oregon-Utah right there with the Utes, of course, moving to the Big 12. BYU and Texas at 2.38 million. Oregon State, Arizona at 1.4 million. Everything else woefully below 500,000. And that Houston-Kansas State game, I believe, was 41-0, 371,000 viewers. Week 10 doesn't bode well for the Big 12 going forward because Oklahoma and Texas accounted for the top 2 viewed games of the week for the Big 12 and 2 of the top 7 in college football. And, of course, Bedlam is no more at 3.76 million. Kansas State and Texas went to overtime. And, of course, Texas accounted for most of that viewership. You got to think 60-70% of those viewers were Texas fans or drawn to the TV by Texas, making a run to the Big 12 championship. Colorado still in play at 2.77 million, despite at this point losing every game. And they took on Oregon State as the 8th highest rated game of the week. Everything else just over 1 million with Kansas, Iowa State, BYU, and West Virginia. And then under that million mark by a ton, headed up by TCU and Texas Tech, UCF and Cincinnati with a paltry audience of 264,000 or 26 out of 36 games rated in Week 10. The Week 11 numbers look good on the surface, but consider Utah was playing Washington, and of course the Huskies were undefeated at that time and vying for a college football playoff appearance, and that accounts for the 5+ million views there. Texas is the 2nd highest rated game of the week of the Big 12 and the 8th highest in the country. Oklahoma, same deal. They're off to the SEC and one of the top 10 games in terms of TV viewership in Week 11. Oklahoma State and UCF was the only other game in the Big 12 that accounted for more than 1 million views. Iowa State and BYU almost at that mark at 943,000. Week 12, a common theme. Either Colorado is the highest rated game of the week or it's some combination of Oklahoma and Texas. There you see Texas and Oklahoma account for 2 of the 9 highest rated games in college football that week and the 2 highest figures coming out of the Big 12. Oregon, Arizona State, of course. Oregon at that point, they were in the running for a college football playoff and had to be credited with most of those numbers. Everything else in the Big 12 under 1 million viewers, headed up by Kansas State. Moving on to Week 13, we've got a Texas Tech game that was the 9th rated game in college football that week, played on a Friday, and Texas blew them out by 50. Still 3.77 million people hung around to see Texas play. And there we've got the Oklahoma-TCU game also on Black Friday, the 14th highest rated game in college football that week. The 2 most successful leftover games for the Big 12 for teams that are going to be playing in 2024. Iowa State, Kansas State in the snow at 3.3 million. BYU, Oklahoma State at 2.39 million. 2 of the highest rated games, conference games of the entire season played on that final weekend in the Big 12. Consider this, folks, when trying to project how well the Big 12 is going to do in TV viewership in 2024, that there were 5 Big 12 games that ranked in the top 25, 5 conference games from the Big 12, and Colorado played in all 5 of those 25 games. If we take out Oklahoma and Texas, not a good look for the Big 12 going forward. Let's check out the top 10 games in the Big 12 conference games for 2023. They involved, this was not a conference game, of course, but it's now a conference game. Colorado-TCU by far was the most watched game. Iowa State, Kansas State at 3.29 million was the current Big 12 membership highest rated game. And on down the line with only a handful of games over 1 million. And we will see that on our next graphic as Oklahoma State and UCF at 1.21 million and BYU and Kansas at 1.2 million. Cincinnati, BYU near the bottom portion of the top 10. So let's look at it this way. There were 41 conference games that the Big 12 had on national television that were rated. One of those games, that was TCU and Colorado, of course, rated over 7 million views. There were only 2 games with over 3 million. And once we unveil the rest of the series and look at the other conferences, we're going to see how paltry these numbers are. The Big 12 with only 4 games over 2 million viewers and 12 of 41. So way under 50%, more like 25 to 30% of the games in the Big 12 had more than 1 million viewers. That is an extremely low number. Also, keep in mind that the numbers for the Big 12 championship, not the best. It wasn't the greatest game either. It was somewhat competitive in the first half, and then Texas rolled in the second half over Oklahoma State. Also consider that 6 of the 41 games drew less than 200,000 viewers, capped off by that Rice-Houston game with only 83,000 people watching. And so you see the number of games involving Cincinnati, Houston, UCF in particular that did not fare well. Those are bad football teams. They're a group of 5 teams that came into the Big 12. We'll see if they're able to gain any kind of leverage going forward. And Houston's an NFL town that cares about the Texans, doesn't care about the Cougars, and that's reflected in the TV ratings. The Big 12 is by far the least watched conference in college football and has been for quite some time. Then you subtract Texas and Oklahoma, and it gets really, really bleak. Also consider that Colorado's numbers are not going to be maintained, period, because there's no way there's going to be this kind of hype or energy surrounding Deion Sanders because it was his first season, unless they're making some kind of championship run. So as long as, even if they get better and go from 4-8 to, let's say, 6-6, 7-5, it's going to lose its luster. There's no question about that. The fervor has ceased for Colorado football. They're still going to rate well and probably will rank as the number 1 ratings draw on TV in the Big 12, I would assume, for 2024. But my goodness, it's not looking good for the Big 12 in regards to keeping up with everyone else. In terms of making money, they've got a nice little TV contract. They make money. They're still in the big-time football business, but compared to the SEC and the Big 10, oh my goodness, really in comparison, nobody's watching. Big 12 fans, let me know what you got. Everybody else as well. We are unveiling the TV ratings. Is there anything that I missed? Of course, there's a lot of different angles to take on this. We try to put it into context. Of course, we displayed the numbers. Those are facts, but then try to put it into context as well. We will march on with our TV ratings series. The ACC's next. Please like and subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football.